Welcome to the Maybe Not So Great Books channel, You Decide. This is lesson 8 of 14. The real minimum wage is always zero from Basic Economics. A Common Sense Guide to the Economy, 5th edition by Thomas Sowell. The government can make it illegal to pay less than $15 an hour. It cannot make a worker's labor worth $15 an hour.
And that line, that one sentence, really gets to the heart of everything we're going to talk about today.
It really does. It's the gap between those two ideas, what the law says versus what the economy does. Welcome back. We are diving deep again into Thomas Sowell's Basic Economics, and today we are definitely grabbing the third rail of economic policy.
Yeah, this isn't an abstract discussion about widgets or, agricultural price supports. This is personal.
It's about jobs. It's about paychecks. It's the most personal economic transaction most of us ever make, selling our own labor.
Right, and everyone has an opinion on it. Everyone has had that first job or seen that first paycheck and thought, this should be higher.
Of course. So our mission for this deep dive is to really try and understand Sowell's very counterintuitive argument here. We need to figure out why he claims that these laws, which are so clearly intended to help the poor, can actually end up being destructive for the very people they're designed to protect.
It's what he would call a classic case of the tragedy of intentions. You look at the goals of a policy, and the goals are noble, a living wage. How can you be against that?
It sounds like you're a monster if you're against it. It feels like you're saying you want people to struggle.
Exactly. The rhetoric is powerful. But Sowell's whole approach is to say, okay, let's put the intentions and the rhetoric on the shelf for a minute and just look at the mechanics, what actually happens.
Let's look at the results, not the hopes.
The results. And to do that, we have to start with the basic mechanism. We have to understand what a price floor is.
Okay, so let's start there. We've talked about this in other lessons with, cheese and wheat and things like that. But for anyone just jumping in, what is a price floor in just plain English?
A price floor is just a government-mandated minimum price. It's a line drawn in the sand that says the price of something cannot legally fall below this point. It's a floor. You can't go lower.
So if the government sets a price floor for, I don't know, a bushel of corn at $5.
It becomes illegal for a farmer to sell you that corn for $4 and illegal for you to buy it, even if you both want to make that deal. The government forbids it.
Okay. And for this chapter, the product we're talking about isn't corn, it's labor.
It's labor. And this is a crucial mental shift you have to make. In the labor market, the worker is the seller. You're selling your skills, your time, your effort.
And the employer is the customer.
The employer is the customer buying that labor. And the wage. That's just the price. So a minimum wage law is, quite simply, a price floor on labor.
Got it. So it's subject to the same economic laws as any other price.
It's subject to the law of supply and demand. And you can't repeal that law any more than you can repeal the law of gravity. The first rule, the most basic rule, is that when the price of something goes up, people tend to buy less of it.
Which makes total sense for things. If coffee doubles in price, I drink less coffee, maybe I switch to tea, but does it really work that way for jobs? I mean, a business needs workers, right? They can't just decide to buy less labor.
Well, they can't stop entirely, no, but the demand for labor isn't fixed. It's what economists call elastic. It stretches. If the price of labor is forced up, employers will find ways to use less of it. They might not hire that extra person they were thinking about.
Or they might cut back someone's hours.
Or they might invest in a machine that does the same job. They will adjust. They have to.
So let's connect the dots. The government steps in, passes a law. The minimum wage is now $15 an hour. But the market, the reality of what that specific job produces for the business is only, say, $10 an hour.
Then you have a situation where the price has been artificially forced above the market rate. And anytime you do that for any product, you create a surplus.
Right. And we saw this with agriculture. You set the price of milk too high, people buy less milk, and the government ends up with warehouses full of surplus cheese that nobody wants.
Mountains of it.
Yeah.
A surplus is just unsold inventory. But when you apply this to the labor market, unsold inventory is a very cold academic term. A surplus of labor has a much more common name. It's called unemployment.
A person who wants to sell their labor but can't find a buyer at the mandated price?
That's it. And that is the absolute core of Sowell's argument. The government have the power to pass a law setting a price. It can say tomorrow the minimum wage is $100 an hour. What it cannot do is force an employer to actually hire someone at that price.
Right. You can set the price, but you can't command the purchase.
You can't.
Let's dig into that hiring decision itself, because I think this gets to a really common emotional argument for the minimum wage. It's the difference between what Sowell calls merit and productivity.
Yes.
Most of us, we see someone working a really tough job, a dishwasher or a janitor, and we feel that person works hard, they're a good person, they deserve to make a decent living. It's a moral argument.
And it's a valid moral sentiment. Nobody, and certainly not Sowell, is arguing that these people aren't hardworking or deserving, but he's saying the economy doesn't operate on merit. It operates on productivity.
And productivity, in this economic sense, means what? Not how much you sweat.
No. It means how much value does this hour of your labor add to the business? How much extra revenue does it generate? It's a cold, hard math equation.
Okay, let's do the math then. I think it makes it clearer. Let's say I own a small business, maybe a little sandwich shop.
You own a sandwich shop,
Yeah.
and you're thinking of hiring someone for the lunch rush, just to clear tables and maybe wash some trays. It's an entry-level position.
Yeah.
No experience needed. So you look at your books. You figure that having that person there will let you turn over tables faster, serve more customers, and that it will add, let's say, $10 an hour in value to your bottom line.
So the productivity of that job is $10 an hour. That's the most I can possibly pay before I start losing money on it.
That's your break-even point. So a high school kid comes in looking for their first job. They have no experience, but they're eager. They're willing to work for $8 an hour.
The math works. I pay 8, they produce 10, my business makes $2, the kid gets a job, gets some work experience, gets a paycheck.
A voluntary transaction that benefits everyone. It happens because the price, $8, is below the value created, $10. But now, the city council passes a new law. The minimum wage is now $15.
Okay, so that same kid walks in.
Has their productivity changed? Are they suddenly able to wash dishes 50% faster?
No, of course not. They're the same kid. The value they add to my shop is still $10.
But the law says you must pay them $15. So now the math is, pay $15 to get $10 in value. You are now losing $5 every single hour that kid is working.
I mean, I can't do that. I'm not running a charity. My shop would go out of business.
Of course, and that's the point. So what's your decision?
I don't hire them. I do it myself. Or my other staff have to pick up the slack and maybe service is a little slower, but I don't make the hire.
An ed teenager who was willing to work for $8, what's their wage now?
It's not 15.
Yeah.
It's not 8. It's 0.
And that is the title of this lesson. The real minimum wage is always 0.
It's such a brutal, powerful phrase.
It is, because it cuts through all the political noise. The politician says, we raise the wage to $15, but what the law actually did was make it illegal to hire anyone whose skills produce less than $15 an hour in value.
You've just outlawed entry-level jobs. You've sawed off the bottom rung of the economic ladder.
You have. And in doing so, you create two distinct groups of people.
Right. There's the people who benefit and the people who get hurt.
It's the seen and the unseen. The seen are the workers who already had a job and were making, say, $14 an hour. Now they get a $1 raise. They're happy. The politician can stand with them for a photo op. Look at the good we did.
We see them. Their story gets told. But then there's the other group.
The unseen. The kid from your sandwich shop. The person who never gets hired in the first place. The person whose hours get cut from 30 to 20. We don't see news stories about jobs that were never created. They're invisible, but their wage went to 0.
And the really critical point Sowell makes is about who is in that unseen group. It's not random.
No, it is absolutely not random.
Yeah.
You have to ask yourself, who in the economy has a low level of productivity? Is it the senior software engineer?
No, she's making $90 an hour. The minimum wage is a rounding error to her.
Right. Is it the experienced plumber?
Yeah.
The tenured professor? No. The people whose productivity is hovering near that minimum level are overwhelmingly the young, the inexperienced, and the least skilled.
The very people who need that first job the most to get a foothold.
And the minimum wage law slams the door right in their face. It essentially says to them, unless you can already produce $15 of value an hour, you are legally forbidden from working.
This makes me think about the idea of on-the-job training, because a lot of people dismiss these jobs. They say, oh, it's just flipping burgers. Who cares if we lose some of those jobs?
But Sowell argues that's a profound misunderstanding of what those jobs are. They aren't dead ends. They're on-ramps.
Explain that.
You don't learn how to work in a classroom. You learn algebra in a classroom. You learn how to work at work. You learn that you have to show up on time every day.
Right. You learn you can't just be on your phone when a customer is standing there.
You learn how to take direction from a manager you might not like. How to cooperate with coworkers. These are foundational skills. They are what make you more productive over time.
And those skills make you more valuable, which allows you to command a higher wage later.
Exactly. The kid who gets the $8 an hour job at 16, by the time they're 18, they've learned all those things. Now they're worth $12 an hour.
Right.
Then they learn more, they're worth 20. But if you make that first $8 job illegal, they never get on that escalator.
So they're still at zero when they're 20, with no experience.
And they are now competing against a new wave of 16-year-olds for the few entry-level jobs that still exist. It's a trap. By trying to mandate a higher wage now, you might be condemning someone to a lifetime of lower wages or no wages at all.
It's a brutal trade-off.
That's the argument.
I want to shift to the evidence because Sowell is a data guy. He doesn't just theorize. And there's a piece of data in this chapter about Black teenage unemployment in the U.S. that is, frankly, it's stunning.
It is. It totally upends the standard narrative we're all used to hearing.
The standard narrative being that, economic disparities in the Black community are the result of systemic racism, and therefore we need government interventions like the minimum wage to counteract that discrimination.
Right. That's the story. So Sowell says, okay, let's test that. Let's get in a time machine and go back to the United States in 1948.
1948. Let's just paint the picture. This is not some enlightened era. This is peak Jim Crow. Segregation is legally enforced, discrimination is open, it's blatant, it's everywhere.
You would expect, based on the modern narrative, that Black unemployment must have been catastrophically high.
Through the roof. But that's not what the data shows.
It's the opposite. In 1948, the unemployment rate for Black teenage males, 16 to 17 years old, was 9.4%. The rate for white teenage males of the same age was 10.2%.
Let me just say that again because it's so important. In 1948, Black teenage unemployment was actually lower than white teenage unemployment.
And both were, by modern standards, pretty low. Compare that to recent decades where Black teenage unemployment has often been over 40%, multiples of the white rate.
So the obvious question is, what happened? Did America become more racist after 1948?
I think it's safe to say no. So some other variable must have changed. And so Sowell points his finger directly at the minimum wage.
Why? What was different about it in 1948?
It was basically irrelevant. The federal minimum wage hadn't been raised in years, and post-war inflation had made it so low that almost everyone was already earning more. It wasn't a binding price floor. You had, for all intents and purposes, a free market for low-skilled labor.
And in that free market, Black teens were getting jobs at a higher rate than white teens.
Yes. But then, starting in the 1950s, the government began to aggressively and repeatedly raise the minimum wage and expand its coverage. And if you chart it, every time the minimum wage takes a significant jump up, the gap between Black and white teenage unemployment gets wider.
Okay, but why? Why would a price floor hurt one group more than the other? This is where the logic gets really uncomfortable for a lot of people.
It does. It forces us to look at what Sowell calls the economics of discrimination. He makes the argument that a minimum wage law actually makes it cheaper for a racist to discriminate.
That sounds completely backwards. We're told these laws fight discrimination.
I know. But let's walk through the logic. Imagine you're an employer in, say, 1950, and you're a bigot. You just have a personal preference for hiring white workers.
Okay, a bad guy.
A bad guy. In a free market, without a minimum wage, two young men apply for a job. One is white, one is Black. They're equally productive. The white kid says, I'll work for $10 an hour. The Black kid, who knows he faces discrimination and is maybe more desperate for the job, can say, I'll do the exact same work for $8 an hour.
He's competing on price. He's using a lower wage to overcome the employer's prejudice.
Correct. Now, the bigoted employer has a choice. He can indulge his prejudice and hire the white kid for $10, or he can act in his own economic self-interest and hire the equally good Black kid for $8. If he chooses the white kid, what happens?
He's paying $2 extra an hour for the privilege of being a bigot. Discrimination has a cost.
It is a price tag. And in a competitive business, that adds up. The employer, who hires the cheaper labor, can sell his products for less and drive the racist out of business. The market punishes discrimination.
It puts pressure on him to put his wallet ahead of his prejudice.
Yes. But now let's introduce a minimum wage law. The government steps in and declares, you must pay everyone at least $10 an hour.
So now the Black applicant can't offer to work for $8. It's illegal.
He can't. So now the racist employer looks at the two applicants. White kid, $10. Black kid, $10. The price is identical.
So the cost of discriminating
is now $0. He can indulge his prejudice for free. The law has removed the economic penalty for his bigotry.
Wow. By trying to enforce equality of outcome, The law removed the very tool that the disadvantaged person was using to compete.
It stripped away their most effective competitive advantage. When you mandate equal pay for people with unequal opportunities or, who face unequal prejudice, you can inadvertently lock the disadvantaged out entirely. The employer will then choose based on other factors, maybe education levels from segregated schools or just pure prejudice, and the minority worker loses.
It's just devastating to think that something with such good intentions could have that effect.
And so Lowell points out, this wasn't always an accident. In the early 20th century, some racist unions in America and in other countries actively campaigned for minimum wage laws for this exact reason.
To price their competition out of the market.
To price black workers out of the market. Which brings us to the international example in the book, which is just as powerful.
Well,
South Africa.
During the apartheid era?
Yes. You had powerful, well-organized white labor unions and a massive population of unorganized, low-skilled black workers.
And the political power was all in the hands of the white minority.
Completely. And in the marketplace, employers, who were mostly white, were just looking to make a profit. They started realizing they could hire black workers to do certain jobs for far less than they were paying the unionized white workers.
So the free market was actually starting to break down the economic walls of apartheid.
It was starting to, yes, because capitalism is, at its core, agnostic. It's about profit. The white unions saw this as an existential threat. They saw their high-wage jobs being threatened by this cheaper labor pool. So what did they do?
They couldn't just pass a law saying, don't hire black people.
No, that's too blatant. So they lobbied for something that sounded much more progressive. They lobbied for equal pay for equal work, a rate for the job policy.
Which is just another name for a minimum wage for certain industries.
Exactly. They demanded that all workers, black and white, performing the same job must be paid the same high union-level wage.
On the surface, it sounds fair, but the intent was?
The intent was to eliminate the black worker's only competitive advantage. The white unions knew that if an employer had to pay the same high wage to everyone, they would almost certainly hire the white worker, who probably had more formal education and social connections.
So the minimum wage became a tool to enforce the color bar.
It was a tool of exclusion, masquerading as a tool of fairness. So quotes a white union leader at the time who said as much. He basically said, our only job protection left is forcing equal pay.
And the effects of this didn't just vanish when apartheid ended. Sowell gives a more modern example about a company called Tiger Wheels.
This is a perfect case study of how this plays out in a globalized world. Tiger Wheels, a South African company, made aluminum car wheels. They were successful and wanted to expand their factory.
Now you would think, great. South Africa has sky-high unemployment, sometimes 25–30%. Millions of people desperate for work.
You have a huge surplus of labor right there. But because of the legacy of these union-pushed labor laws, the mandated wage for that labor was very high.
So the price floor was set way above what the market would be.
Way above. So Tiger Wheels is sitting in a country full of people who need jobs, but the law makes it too expensive to hire them. So they ran the numbers, and they decided to build their new factory in Poland.
Poland?
In Poland. Now, here is the absolutely crazy part of the story. Sowell notes that, according to the company's own data, the South African workers were actually more productive than the Polish workers.
Wait, what? They were better at the job?
They were better at making wheels. But the mandated price of that more productive South African labor was so artificially high that it was cheaper for the company to build a factory in Poland, hire less productive workers, and ship the wheels all the way back to their markets than it was to hire the better workers in their own backyard.
That is just... It's a perfect, tragic illustration of the whole concept. The South African workers priced themselves out of a job they were better at.
They didn't price themselves out. The law priced them out. And as a result, the jobs went to Poland, and the South African unemployment line got longer. Capital is mobile. It will go where it gets the best return. If you make your labor too expensive, the capital will leave.
It's a bleak picture. But the book does offer some contrast. It points to countries that went the other way. He mentions Switzerland and Singapore.
And these are such important examples because they act as a sort of control group in this global experiment. What do they have in common?
They don't have a national minimum wage.
Neither of them has a federally mandated minimum wage law. And according to the common wisdom, these places should be horrible sweatshops with mass poverty.
But they're not. They're two of the wealthiest, most prosperous countries on Earth, and they consistently have some of the lowest unemployment rates in the world, often around 2 or 3%.
It's incredible.
So if there's no law forcing an employer in, say, Zurich to pay a high wage, why do they?
Because they have to. The key is productivity.
Hmm.
Those economies have focused relentlessly on making their workers incredibly valuable through education, through training, through technology.
So they focused on raising the value side of the equation, not the price side.
That's it, exactly. If a worker can generate $50 of value in an hour, companies will be lining up, competing with each other to hire that worker. And that competition is what bids the wage up to $40, $45. The high wage is a result of high productivity.
Not the cause of it.
It's a reflection of reality, not an artificial mandate. So Sowell's point is that trying to create prosperity by passing a minimum wage law is like trying to make it warmer in the room by holding a match under the thermometer.
You can make the number go up, but you haven't changed the actual temperature.
You've just broken the thermometer.
Okay, let's bring this right into 2026, because I think we see the substitution effect happening all around us. When I walk into a fast food restaurant or a supermarket today, I see the Tiger Wheel story playing out. But instead of the jobs going to Poland, they're going to a server farm in California.
You're talking about automation, the robots.
The robots, the self-ordering kiosks, the self-checkout lanes, it's everywhere now.
It's the modern form of the substitution effect.
Break that down for us.
It's simple. We said earlier that when the price of something goes up, people buy less. For an employer, there are two main inputs: labor and capital, people and machines.
Yeah.
If you artificially raise the price of labor, you change the math on the trade-off between labor and capital. Let's take that ordering kiosk. The technology has been around for a while. It wasn't invented yesterday.
Right.
Let's say, just for a simple number, that installing and running that kiosk cost the equivalent of $12 an hour.
Okay, the robot's wage is $12.
If the minimum wage for a human cashier is $10 an hour, who do you hire?
The human, they're cheaper. And a human can do other things. They can smile, they can fix a problem with an order. The human is a better deal.
The human keeps the job. But now, along comes the fight for 15. The law changes. The minimum wage for that human is now $15 an hour. Or in some cities, 20.
But the robot's wage is still 12.
The math is just flipped on its head. Overnight, the machine became the more profitable option. The government, with the best of intentions, just subsidized automation.
So they accelerated the replacement of human workers with machines.
They forced businesses to adopt technology that might not have been economically viable for another 10 years. And it's not just kiosks. It's automated customer service phone lines. It's robotic arms in warehouses.
And if we circle back to our earlier point, when that entry-level cashier job vanishes and gets replaced by an iPad, you haven't just lost a job.
You've lost a classroom. That's the real long-term damage. That was the place where a 17-year-old learned the basics of work. If that first rung is gone, how do you even start to climb the ladder?
You might never get the chance. You stay on the ground.
Which can create a permanent class of people with no work experience and no clear path to getting any. That's the real minimum wage of zero, becoming a life sentence.
Now, I have to push back a little, play devil's advocate, because we've laid out this very clear, logical case from Sowell, but we also see news stories that seem to contradict it. A state will raise its minimum wage, and 6 months later, a study comes out saying employment was fine, the sky didn't fall.
That's a very important point.
How does the theory account for that? Is it just wrong?
No, the theory isn't wrong, but the real world is messy and has a lot of variables. The first and most important thing Sowell warns about is that the negative effects only kick in when the minimum wage is set above the actual market clearing price.
What does that mean? Market clearing price?
It's just the wage that would exist naturally if there were no law. So think of a very expensive high-demand city, maybe San Francisco or Boston. To even get someone to show up to work at a coffee shop there, you might already have to pay them $18 an hour just to compete.
So the market wage is already $18.
Right. Now, if the city council passes a $15 minimum wage law, what happens?
Nothing. It doesn't affect anyone because they're all making more than that already.
Exactly. The law is irrelevant. It's like passing a law that says you can't sell a used car for less than $50. Nobody was doing that anyway. But the politician can hold a press conference and take credit for the fact that the new law didn't cause any unemployment.
So they get a political win for a law that had no actual effect.
And that's dangerous. Because then they think, well, that was easy, let's raise it to 25. Eventually, you cross the line where the wage floor is binding, and that's when you see the damage.
It also matters how big the jump is, right?
Of course, a tiny increase 10 or 20 cents can get absorbed by businesses. It's just noise in the data. But a jump of 40 or 50%, like we've seen in some cities, that's an economic shock. Businesses can't just absorb that, they have to react.
We should also probably mention the big academic debate here. People may have heard of the Card and Kruger study from the 90s.
Ah, yes. The New Jersey, Pennsylvania fast food study.
Right. It's the one study that is always cited by proponents of the minimum wage. What did it find, and what does Sowell say about it?
So they looked at fast food restaurants on either side of the New Jersey-Pennsylvania border. New Jersey raised its minimum wage, Pennsylvania didn't. And their initial finding was that employment did not go down in New Jersey. In fact, they claimed it might have gone up slightly.
So, case closed. Sowell is wrong.
Well, not so fast. That study has been debated and critiqued for decades. For one thing, it was a very short-term analysis. It looked at the immediate effects.
It's stage one thinking.
Exactly. It doesn't capture the long-term adjustments. A restaurant owner doesn't buy a new kiosk system the day after the law changes. That takes time. They don't decide to cancel plans for a new location overnight. Those are long-run effects.
And there's also the problem of what you're actually measuring.
Right. If you call up a list of restaurants before the wage hike and then call the same list after, you are only talking to the businesses that survived.
The one that went out of business because of the higher costs doesn't answer the phone.
It doesn't answer the phone. And more importantly, you can't survey the restaurant that was never opened in the first place because an entrepreneur looked at the new wage laws and said, I can't make the numbers work.
The unseen again.
The unseen is the ghost in the machine of economics. It's the hardest thing to measure, but it's often where the real story is. The opportunities that were lost. The jobs that never existed.
So as we start to pull all this together, it's important to be clear. Sowell isn't making an argument for poverty. He's not saying that $7 an hour is a great life.
Not at all. He's making an argument about cause and effect. He's saying you cannot create prosperity by decree. You can't just pass a law that says poverty is illegal. If you could, why stop at $15 an hour?
Right, that's the logical conclusion. Why not make it 100? Why not 1,000? Let's all be rich.
And we all instinctively know that a $1,000 minimum wage would destroy the entire economy overnight because no business could afford to pay it. Sowell is just pointing out that the exact same economic law is at work at $15, just on a smaller and slower scale.
True prosperity, in his view, comes from productivity, from having the skills, the tools, the technology that make an hour of human labor actually worth more.
You have to bake a bigger economic pie. You can't make everyone better off by just fighting over how to slice a shrinking pie. Focus on increasing the value of the worker, not on fixing the price.
It leaves you, the listener, with a really tough question to think about, a real policy trade-off. Is it better to have a system where some people get a legally mandated living wage, but others are pushed out of the labor market entirely and earn zero?
Or is it better to have a system where anyone who wants a job can find one, even if the starting wage is low, and use that as a stepping stone to learn skills and earn more in the future?
There's no easy answer. But Sowell's argument is that one of those paths leads to opportunity, and the other, for the most vulnerable, leads to a dead end.
It's a powerful argument to grapple with.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap. Takeaway number one. A minimum wage is a price floor on labor.
2. Price floors, when they are set above the market rate, create surpluses, and a surplus of labor is called unemployment.
3. The real minimum wage is always zero. That's what's earned by the person who loses their job or never gets hired in the first place.
And 4. The people who are most likely to be in that group, the ones earning zero, are the young, the inexperienced, and the least skilled, the very people the law was intended to help.
That was Lesson 8 of 14 on Basic Economics, a common sense guide to the economy, 5th edition. Subscribe for the full series. If you haven't seen our debate overview of the whole book, check that out, link in the description. Thanks for being here. See you next time.